Before diving into the most radical transformation in ancient Egyptian history, when one pharaoh dared to challenge 3,000 years of tradition and brought an empire to the edge of chaos. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history's most controversial figures, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about how one man's vision nearly destroyed the greatest civilization of the ancient world. Tonight, we journey to 1353 BCE, when Prince Amenhotep stood before the sacred walls of Karnak Temple, not knowing that within years, he would order these very walls torn down stone by stone. The morning sun cast long shadows across the limestone courtyard of Thebes' palace as Prince Amenhotep stood motionless before the window, his elongated fingers pressed against the cool stone. Below, thousands of priests filed through the streets toward Karnak Temple, their white robes creating rivers of fabric between the mud brick houses. The prince's jaw clenched as he watched them, these men who controlled more wealth than the royal treasury, who whispered that his strange appearance meant the gods had cursed him. His mother, Queen T, entered silently, her golden headdress catching the light. Thoughtful. "They mock you," she said simply, moving beside her son. Annoyed. "The priests of Amun grow bold. Yesterday they refused your father's request for grain distribution, claiming the god demanded it remain in temple stores." Amenhotep's dark eyes never left the procession below. "They forget who rules Egypt," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Angered. "They believe their god is greater than Pharaoh." T placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his narrow frame. Thoughtful. "Your father grows weak. Soon you will wear the double crown. What will you do then?" The prince finally turned from the window, and T saw something in his face that made her step back. Not madness, but a certainty so absolute it seemed to burn behind his eyes. Determined. "I will show them a truth they cannot imagine," he said. "There is only one God, Mother, only one who matters, and he speaks to me alone." The great hall of Karnak Temple thundered with the voices of 100 priests as High Priest Amenhotep raised his arms for silence. The massive columns, each carved with the victories of past pharaohs, seemed to lean inward, listening to his words. "Brothers," he called out, his voice echoing off the painted ceiling where stars glittered in an eternal night. The air grows stranger with each passing season. He speaks of visions, of a disk in the sky that whispers secrets. The nobles worry, the people whisper. A younger priest stepped forward, his shaved head gleaming with sacred oils. "Perhaps the prince is touched by the gods," he suggested carefully. "Perhaps Amun tests us." Amenhotep's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Amun does not test," he said slowly. "Amun commands. And through us, his faithful servants, he has made Egypt the greatest empire the world has known. We control the grain that feeds the people. We control the gold that fills the treasury. We control the prayers that keep the Nile flooding." He walked among them now, his leopard skin cloak brushing the floor. "The old pharaoh weakens daily. Soon the strange prince will take the throne. We must be ready, double the temple guards, secure our granaries, and most importantly, remind the people daily that without Amun's blessing, the Nile will fail, the crops will wither, and Egypt will return to chaos." The priests nodded, understanding the unspoken message. They would not bow to a mad prince's visions. Princess Nefertiti moved through the palace gardens like a gazelle, her movements fluid and purposeful as she approached the pool where Amenhotep sat alone, his feet dangling in the water. The lotus blossoms floated around his ankles, and she noticed how he studied their perfect symmetry with an intensity that others might reserve for battle plans. "My lord," she said, though they were not yet married, "your father summons you." Amenhotep didn't look up, but his lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Let him wait." Thoughtful. "I'm watching the sun's reflection. Do you see how it dances on the water? How it gives life to everything it touches?" Nefertiti settled beside him, her own feet sliding into the cool water. The servants say you spend hours here, staring at the sun. They worry you will damage your eyes. Now he did look at her, and she was struck again by the strange beauty of his face. Not handsome by traditional standards, but compelling in its uniqueness. I see more clearly than anyone in Egypt, he said. The sun disk, the Aten, shows me truths that the priests of Amun would kill to suppress. They have built their power on lies, Nefertiti. They claim to speak for gods who do not exist, stone idols that cannot see, or hear, or feel. She leaned closer, drawn by his conviction. And what does the Aten tell you? His hand found hers beneath the water. That there is only one truth, one power, one God, and that together, you and I will reshape Egypt in that truth. The death rattle echoed through the royal chamber as Pharaoh Amenhotep III drew his final breath, his body finally surrendering to the illness that had consumed him for months. Amenhotep stood at his father's bedside, watching as the light faded from the old king's eyes, feeling neither grief nor triumph, only a sense of destiny fulfilling itself. Chief Vizier A entered, bowing low. "My lord," he said to the prince, "Egypt awaits your command. The coronation must be arranged. The priests of Amun expect." "The priests expect nothing," Amenhotep interrupted, his voice carrying new authority. "Send word to every temple in Egypt. The new pharaoh will be crowned, not in Karnak, but in the open courtyard of the palace, beneath the noon sun." A's weathered face showed his shock. "But my lord, tradition demands." "Tradition is dead," Amenhotep said, turning from his father's body. "As dead as the old pharaoh. I am Amenhotep IV, and I will not bow to Amun or his corrupt servants. Prepare my coronation for tomorrow. Any priest who refuses to attend will be noted." He strode to the window, where the morning sun was rising over Thebes. "And A," he added without turning, "send craftsmen to my chambers. I want new crowns made, not the traditional double crown, but something new, something that honors the true God of Egypt." A bowed and retreated, his mind racing. In all his years of service, he had never heard a pharaoh speak with such dangerous certainty. Coronation courtyard blazed under the merciless noon sun as Amenhotep IV emerged wearing a crown unlike anything Egypt had ever seen. A tall blue crown with a golden disc at its peak, rays extending downward like divine fingers. The assembled nobles shifted uncomfortably in the heat, sweat running down their painted faces, while the priests of Amun stood in a cluster, their expressions dark with disapproval. Nefertiti appeared beside him, and gasps rippled through the crowd. She too wore a crown, tall and blue, marking her as equal to the pharaoh. No queen had ever been depicted at such height with such power. "People of Egypt," Amenhotep IV called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Today marks not just a new reign, but a new truth. Too long have we lived in darkness, worshipping shadows in dark temples, feeding gold to priests who promise what they cannot deliver." High Priest Amenhotep stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this breaks with 3,000 years of commanding." "Silence," the new pharaoh commanded, and guards moved to flank the priest. Passionate. "I speak now of the true God, the only God, the Aten, the sun disk that gives all life. Look above you. See how he shines upon us all equally, peasant and noble, Egyptian and foreign. He needs no dark temple, no secret rituals, no priest to interpret his will. He speaks to me directly, and through me, to you." The crowd stood stunned as Amenhotep IV raised his arms to the sun. "From this day forward, I am no longer Amenhotep. I take the name Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and Egypt will be reborn in truth." The sound of hammers striking chisels echoed through Karnak temple as workers, under guard supervision, began defacing the name of Amun wherever it appeared. Akhenaten stood in the sanctuary's heart, watching as centuries of religious art was systematically destroyed. His overseer, a loyal man named Ramos, directed the work with mechanical precision, though his hands trembled slightly. "Every cartouche, every image, every mention," Akhenaten commanded, running his fingers over a partially destroyed relief. "Amun never existed. Let his name be forgotten." A young scribe named Penthu approached nervously. "Majesty, the people are frightened. They fear Amun's wrath. Some refuse to leave their homes." Akhenaten turned to him, his elongated face serene. "They fear what the priests taught them to fear. When they see that no catastrophe befalls us, when the Nile still rises and the sun still shines, they will understand that Amun was always a lie." From the temple's entrance came shouting. A group of priests had gathered, led by a younger priest named Kaimwaset. Outraged, "Sacrilege!" he cried. "You invite destruction upon all Egypt. The gods will—" His words were cut short as guards seized him. Akhenaten approached slowly, his strange gait making him seem to glide across the floor. "There are no gods," he said quietly, his face inches from the priests. "Only the Aten. You may accept this truth and live, or cling to your lies and face the consequences. Choose." The priest spat at his feet. Akhenaten smiled sadly. "Take him to the quarries. Perhaps hard labor will open his eyes to the truth." Queen Mother T paced her private chambers, her usual composure cracking as she listened to reports from her spy network. Her trusted servant, Yuya, stood silent as she processed the information. "3 noble families have fled to Nubia, Sayach," she said, her voice tight. "The army grows restless without the blessing of Amun before campaigns. The priests secretly meet at night, planning resistance." She turned to face her servant. "My son has gone too far too fast." Yuya, an elderly man who had served the royal family for 40 years, chose his words carefully. Perhaps the young pharaoh might listen to his mother's counsel? Tiya laughed bitterly. "He listens only to the voice of his Aten. Yesterday, he told me that the sun disk speaks to him in dreams, shows him visions of a new city where only truth reigns." She moved to the window, looking out at Thebes. "He plans to abandon this city, Yuya, to build a new capital where no other god has been worshipped." "Surely he cannot simply abandon Thebes," Yuya protested. "This has been Egypt's heart for—" "He can and he will," Tiya interrupted. "He has already sent architects to scout locations. He seeks a virgin site, untouched by what he calls the contamination of false gods." She turned back and Yuya saw fear in her eyes for the first time. "I created a revolutionary, but I fear I may have unleashed a destroyer. The question is whether Egypt can survive his truth." The royal barge sailed north from Thebes, its golden hull cutting through the Nile's waters as Akhenaten stood at the prow, Nefertiti beside him, their eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. Behind them, a flotilla of boats carried architects, scribes, and supplies. The pharaoh had been traveling for 3 days, searching for the perfect site for his new city. As the sun reached its zenith, the barge rounded a bend, and Akhenaten suddenly cried out, "Stop! Drop anchor!" The sailors scrambled to obey, as the pharaoh stared at the eastern cliffs. There, the mountains formed a natural amphitheater, and at the horizon, they created the shape of the hieroglyph for horizon, the very symbol of the Aten. "Do you see it?" he whispered to Nefertiti, his voice trembling with excitement. "The Aten himself has carved his sign into the living rock." Chief Architect Beck approached, unrolling his papyrus maps. "Majesty, this site is barren. There is no infrastructure, no wells, no—" "Perfect," Akhenaten interrupted, "untouched by false gods, unmarked by lying priests. Here, I will build Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten, a city of truth where my people can worship freely under the open sky." He turned to address the entire flotilla, his voice carrying across the water. "Mark this day, here, between these sacred cliffs, We will build paradise on earth. Every building will have open courtyards for worship. Every home will receive the Aten's blessing. And from here, the light of truth will spread throughout Egypt and beyond. The construction site of Akhetaten buzzed with activity, as thousands of workers hauled massive stone blocks under the desert sun. 6 months had passed since Akhenaten's declaration, and already the outline of his revolutionary city was taking shape. The pharaoh walked among the workers personally, an unheard-of breach of protocol, speaking to common laborers as if they were nobles. A dust-covered worker named Amenhotep dropped his tools in shock as the pharaoh approached him directly. "Tell me," Akhenaten said, "what do you think of our new city?" The worker fell to his knees, but Akhenaten raised him up. "No, stand. Under the Aten, all are equal. Speak freely." "Majesty," the worker stammered, I have never seen such buildings. So much open space, so much light. In Thebes, our homes are dark, cramped. Here, even workers' quarters have courtyards." Akhenaten smiled, his strange face radiant. "This is the Aten's gift. In the old temples, only priests could approach the gods. Here, every family can worship from their own home, under the open sky." Nearby, Beck supervised the construction of the Great Aten Temple. Its design unlike anything in Egypt. No dark inner sanctum, no hidden holy of holies, just vast open courtyards with hundreds of offering tables. "Majesty," Beck called out, "the temple's main courtyard is complete. Would you inspect it?" As Akhenaten walked through the space, he began to sing, a hymn to the Aten that he had composed himself, his voice carrying across the construction site, drawing workers to listen to their strange, revolutionary pharaoh. In the shadow of abandoned Karnak temple, High Priest Amenhotep met secretly with a group of powerful nobles and military commanders. The once mighty temple was nearly empty, its treasuries seized, its priests scattered. General Horemheb, commander of Egypt's northern armies, spoke first. "The situation at the borders worsens daily. The Hittites grow bold, knowing Egypt's army no longer receives Amun's blessing before battle. My soldiers fear fighting without the gods' protection." Lord Ramesses, whose family had served pharaohs for generations, added, "Trade is collapsing. Foreign merchants fear dealing with a kingdom that has abandoned its gods. They think us cursed." Amenhotep nodded gravely. "The false pharaoh's madness deepens. My sources say he now claims the Aten speaks through him directly, that he alone can interpret the god's will. He has become the very thing he claimed to oppose, a sole intermediary between humanity and divinity." A younger noble, Seti, leaned forward. "What of the people? Surely they see this madness." "The people are divided," Amenhotep admitted. "Some, especially the poor, embrace this new worship. They enjoy praying without priests, without expensive offerings. But others, particularly in the countryside, maintain the old ways in secret. They hide images of the true gods in their homes, pray in whispers." Horemheb's hand moved to his sword. "We could end this with one strike. The army would follow me." "Not yet," Amenhotep cautioned. "Akhenaten still has supporters, and Nefertiti's popularity protects him. We must wait. Let his revolution crumble under its own weight. When Egypt suffers enough, the people will beg for the old god's return." The great palace of Akhetaten gleamed white in the morning sun, as Nefertiti stood on the window of appearances, throwing gold collars to favored servants below. Beside her, Akhenaten watched with approval, but she noticed the tremor in his hands had worsened. Their 6 daughters played in the courtyard under the watchful eyes of nurses, their laughter echoing off the painted walls depicting the Aten's rays blessing the royal family. "Father," the eldest, Meritaten called out. "Watch me dance for the Aten!" She began to move in the new style Akhenaten had introduced, fluid, natural, nothing like the rigid, formal movements of traditional Egyptian dance. Akhenaten smiled, but Nefertiti saw him grip the balcony's edge for support. That evening, in their private chambers, she confronted him. "You grow weaker! The physicians say—" "The physicians know nothing," he interrupted. "The Aten sustains me. My body is merely transforming, becoming more like the divine light itself." She moved closer, touching his face gently. "The kingdom needs you strong. Reports come daily of unrest, of provinces ignoring your decrees, of temples to the old gods being rebuilt in secret." His eyes blazed with fever or fervor. She could no longer tell which. "Let them resist. The Aten's truth cannot be stopped by human opposition. I have seen it in visions, Nefertiti. Our city will stand forever, a beacon of light in a world of darkness." But even as he spoke, she noticed the yellow tinge to his eyes, the way his breath came short. The revolution's architect was dying, and with him, perhaps, his dream. The workshop of chief sculptor Thutmose bustled with activity, as artists created revolutionary art under Akhenaten's direct supervision. Gone were the idealized formal representations of traditional Egyptian art. The pharaoh insisted on truth, showing himself with his elongated skull, potbelly, and feminine hips, depicting intimate family moments never before seen in royal art. "No, no," Akhenaten corrected a young artist. "The Aten's rays must end in hands, giving life to all they touch, and show my daughters playing, climbing on my lap. The people must see that under the Aten, even Pharaoh is a loving father." Thutmose worked on a bust of Nefertiti, capturing her beauty, but also her humanity. The slight lines around her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. "Majesty," he said, "this new style, some say it mocks traditional beauty." Akhenaten laughed, a sound both joyful and slightly mad. Traditional beauty was a lie. The priests of Amen showed pharaohs as perfect gods, unchanging, unreachable. But I am human, Thutmose, transformed by the Aten's truth. Let the people see their pharaoh as he truly is. A messenger arrived, bowing low. "Urgently, Majesty, urgent news from the borderlands. The Hittite king demands response to his letters. Our vassals in Canaan plead for military support against raiders." Akhenaten waved him away. "Tell them to trust in the Aten. Violence breeds only violence. If they embrace truth and peace, their enemies will be transformed." The messenger departed, confused, while Thutmose exchanged worried glances with his assistants. The pharaoh's spiritual revolution was leaving Egypt's empire dangerously exposed. The river journey from Nubia had taken 2 weeks, and Prince Tutankhaten, Akhenaten's young brother-in-law, arrived at Akhetaten with mixed feelings. At 8 years old, he had been raised in the traditional ways before being summoned to the new capital. His tutor, an elderly sage named Amenhotep, not the high priest, guided him through the city's strange streets. "Remember, young prince," the tutor whispered, "observe everything, but be careful what you say. Your sister's husband has particular views." They were received in the great temple's open courtyard, where Akhenaten led the noon worship. Hundreds of offering tables stood laden with food and flowers under the blazing sun. The pharaoh's voice rose in his hymn to the Aten. "You rise, beautiful, in the horizon of heaven, O living Aten, creator of life." Tutankhaten watched, fascinated and disturbed. In Memphis, where he'd been raised, worship happened in cool, dark temples with ancient rituals. Here, people stood in the crushing heat, arms raised to the sun, some fainting from exposure. After the ceremony, Akhenaten embraced him. "Young brother, you arrive at the perfect time. You will learn the truth here, unburdened by the lies of the old priests." The boy nodded carefully. But that night, in his chambers, He pulled out a small hidden amulet of Amun that his grandmother had given him, clutching it tightly. Something in his young heart told him that this city of truth was built on dangerous foundations. The royal physician Penthew worked through the night in his chambers, mixing herbs and consulting ancient medical texts. Akhenaten's condition had worsened dramatically. The tremors, the yellowing skin, the periods of confusion that the pharaoh insisted were divine visions. Nefertiti entered quietly, her face drawn with worry. "How much longer?" she asked simply. Penthew chose his words carefully. "Majesty, the pharaoh's body fails, but his spirit burns too bright. He refuses rest, refuses treatment, claims the Aten sustains him. And if I ordered you to treat him against his will?" Penthew shook his head, thoughtful. He would see it as betrayal, perhaps even heresy against the Aten. His followers might turn against you. She moved to the window, looking out at the city that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "This revolution will die with him, won't it?" Thoughtful, perhaps not entirely, Penthew offered. The idea of one God, of direct worship without intermediaries. These thoughts, once released, cannot be entirely suppressed. But Akhetaten itself, he gestured at the city, without the pharaoh's vision driving it, without the treasury being emptied to maintain it. A crash came from the pharaoh's chambers. They rushed in to find Akhenaten on the floor, convulsing. His eyes rolled back. As Penthew worked to help him, the pharaoh muttered in his delirium, "The sun sets, but it will rise again. The truth cannot die." Nefertiti held her husband's hand, feeling his life force ebbing, knowing that with it went the protection for everything they had built. The marketplace of Akhetaten buzzed with nervous energy as merchants and citizens gathered in small groups, whispering news that guards tried to suppress. The pharaoh had not been seen for weeks, and strange edicts emerged from the palace, some contradicting others, some bearing Nefertiti's seal instead of Akhenaten's. A fruit seller named Kaimwazet spoke to his customers in hushed tones. "My cousin in Thebes says the old temples are being secretly repaired. The priests of Amun gather followers." A woman buying dates leaned closer. "And what of the tribute? My husband works at the treasury. He says no gold arrives from Nubia, no grain from the Delta provinces." A palace guard, overhearing, stepped forward. "Silence! Spreading rumors is treason against the Aten." But even as he spoke, everyone noticed his hand no longer rested on his sword with the same certainty. A young scribe, running through the market, accidentally dropped his papyrus, revealing diplomatic correspondence. Before guards could retrieve it, citizens saw the seals of foreign kings, letters unanswered, pleas ignored, threats dismissed. That evening, families gathered in their open courtyards for the sunset prayer to the Aten, but many only pretended to pray. In hidden corners of their homes, small statues of Isis, Osiris, and Amun emerged from hiding places. The city of truth was becoming a city of secrets, its foundation cracking like mud bricks in the desert sun. General Horemheb stood at the northern fortress of Memphis, reading desperate reports from the frontier. The Hittites had taken 3 Egyptian vassal cities without resistance. The Nubians delayed tribute shipments. The Libyans raided the western oases unopposed. His lieutenant Ramesses entered with another scroll. "Ahem! General, a message from Akhetaten. The pharaoh commands us to send peace offerings to the Hittites, to show them the light of the Aten." Horemheb crumpled the papyrus in his fist. "Peace offerings! They see our weakness and strike like vultures. And what of our soldiers? They fight without the blessing of gods, without the strength that comes from knowing divine forces support them." "The men grow restless," Ramesses admitted. "They've built a secret shrine to Amarna in the barracks. They make offerings before patrol, asking forgiveness for serving the heretic." Horemheb moved to the window, observing his troops drilling half-heartedly in the courtyard below. How many legions remain loyal to Akhenaten? Truly loyal? Perhaps 1 in 5. The rest serve Egypt, not the Pharaoh. They await direction. The general turned, his scarred face grim. Send word to the southern commanders. Tell them to prepare for changes. Do not commit to writing what changes, they will understand. And increase border fortifications. If Akhenaten will not defend Egypt, we must do it ourselves. As Ramesses departed, Horemheb pulled out a small statue of Amun he kept hidden in his chambers. Great God, he whispered, give us strength to endure this madness a little longer. In the grand throne room of Akhetaten, Nefertiti sat alone on the golden throne, the tall blue crown heavy on her head. Akhenaten had not left his chambers in days, lost in fevered visions, leaving her to hold the kingdom together. The vizier A entered with a group of provincial governors, their faces grave. Governor Amenhotep of Memphis spoke first, solemnly. Majesty, we can no longer maintain order. The people demand the old temples be reopened. They blame the Aten for poor harvests, for military defeats, lacking conviction. The harvests fail because you lack faith, Nefertiti responded, though her voice lacked conviction. The Aten rewards those who truly believe. Governor Kameheb of Abydos stepped forward, respectfully. Majesty, with respect, faith does not fill empty stomachs or defend borders. The treasury is nearly empty from building this city. The army dissolves as soldiers return to their villages. Egypt is dying. Nefertiti stood, her beauty still commanding, even as her authority crumbled. Assertive. Egypt is being reborn. You see only the pain of transformation, not the glory that awaits. But even as she spoke, a messenger burst in, urgent. Majesty, the Pharaoh, he's calling for you. He says the Aten speaks of his journey to the horizon. She ran from the throne room, leaving the governors to exchange meaningful glances. A, ever the survivor, began to consider his options. The revolution's end was approaching, and those who wished to survive needed to choose their positions carefully. Akhenaten lay on his bed, his body wasted to near nothing, but his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to come from another world. Nefertiti held his hand, while their daughters stood nearby, the youngest crying softly. The Pharaoh's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper, but carried absolute certainty. I see it all now, he said, his gaze fixed on something beyond the ceiling. The Aten shows me the truth will survive, but not here, not now. Humans are not ready. He turned to Nefertiti. You must protect our daughters. The priests will return, hungry for revenge. Promise me. I promise, she said, tears streaming down her face. But you will recover. The Aten calls me to journey beyond the horizon, he interrupted. But the seed is planted. Someday, somewhere, people will remember that God needs no intermediary, that truth needs no priest. Young Tutankhaten was brought in to pay respects to his dying brother-in-law. The boy approached nervously, and Akhenaten grabbed his small hand with surprising strength. You will rule after me, the Pharaoh whispered. They will make you forget the Aten, make you restore the old ways. But remember this moment, boy. Remember that one man dared to look at the sun and speak truth. As the sun set, painting the room in golden light, Akhenaten's breathing grew shallow. With his last breath, he whispered, the light, the eternal light. And then the revolutionary pharaoh was gone, leaving behind a shattered kingdom and a dangerous dream. The news of Akhenaten's death spread through Egypt like floodwater, and with it came the collapse of order. In Thebes, crowds stormed the abandoned temples, tearing down the Aten symbols that had been placed there. High priest Amenhotep emerged from hiding, older and thinner, but still commanding, leading prayers to Amun for the first time in over a decade. In Akhetaten itself, panic gripped the city. Government officials burned documents, artists destroyed their revolutionary works, and families prepared to flee. The tomb workers, who had spent years preparing Akhenaten's radical tomb, decorated only with Aten imagery, found themselves suddenly unemployed and frightened. Captain Mahu, chief of police in Akhetaten, tried to maintain order. "Citizens, remain calm. Queen Nefertiti still rules. The government continues." But even as he spoke, he saw his own men removing their Aten badges, some openly wearing hidden amulets of the old gods. A mob gathered outside the great Aten temple, no longer to worship, but to loot. The gold leaf on the walls, the precious offerings, the elaborate decorations, all became targets for desperate citizens who knew the city's days were numbered. Inside the palace, Nefertiti met with the remaining loyal officials. "We must hold," she insisted. "My husband's vision is dead, Majesty," Vizier I said bluntly. "You have perhaps days before the priests arrive with their supporters. You must choose, flee or negotiate surrender." Through the window, smoke rose from burning buildings. Citizens destroying evidence of their participation in the Aten Revolution, afraid of retribution from the returning old order. The council chamber in Memphis became the de facto center of power, as General Horemheb, High Priest Amenhotep, and other traditional power brokers met to decide Egypt's future. Young Tutankhaten sat silent among them, overwhelmed by the rapid changes. Vizier A, having switched sides with perfect timing, now advocated for the boy. The prince is of royal blood, A argued, young enough to be thoughtful, properly educated in the true ways. Under proper guidance, he could heal the divisions. Amenhotep studied the boy carefully. "You were raised in the heretic city, child. What do you believe?" Tutankhaten, coached by A, responded carefully. "I believe in Egypt's traditions, in the gods who have protected our land for thousands of years. My brother-in-law was misguided by false visions." Horemheb leaned forward. "Words are easy, boy. If you become Pharaoh, you will restore the temples, return the capital to Thebes, and erase the heretic's name from history. Can you do this?" The boy nodded, though something in his eyes suggested inner conflict. "I will do whatever Egypt requires." "Then you shall be Pharaoh," Amenhotep declared. "But your name must change. No longer Tutankhaten, living image of Aten. You shall be Tutankhamen, living image of Amun. The god reclaims his own." As they discussed the restoration, no one noticed the boy's hand move unconsciously to where he once wore an Aten amulet, finding only empty space. The counter-revolution had begun, and its first casualty was a child's identity. The exodus from Akhetaten began at dawn, a massive convoy of carts, donkeys, and people on foot streaming out of the dying city. Families who had invested everything in Akhenaten's dream now fled with whatever they could carry. The desert wind already began to reclaim the streets, sand drifting against abandoned buildings. Thutmose the sculptor supervised the loading of his most precious works onto carts, including the famous bust of Nefertiti. "Leave the Aten pieces," he instructed his assistants. "Take only what won't mark us as heretics." His apprentice asked, "Master, will we ever speak of what we created here?" Thutmose paused, then whispered, "Someday perhaps. Art this revolutionary doesn't simply disappear. But for now, we must survive." In the palace, Nefertiti made her final preparations. Her daughters had already been sent away to safe houses, their royal identities hidden. She stood in the window of appearances one last time, looking out at her empty city. I found her there. "Majesty, the barge is ready. You must leave now." "Where will I go?" she asked, not turning. "I was queen of a revolution. Now I'm a reminder of failure. There is a villa in the Delta, I said carefully. Remote, comfortable. You could live quietly. Forgotten, but safe. She laughed bitterly. Forgotten, yes, that's what they want. For all of this to be forgotten. As her barge pulled away from the dock, she watched Akhetaten shrink into the distance, knowing she would never see it again. The restoration of Karnak Temple proceeded with fervent intensity, as hundreds of craftsmen worked to repair the damage of Akhenaten's revolution. Where the Aten's disc had been carved, images of Amun-Ra returned. Where Akhenaten's name appeared, it was chiseled away and replaced with traditional cartouches. High Priest Amenhotep personally supervised the work, ensuring every trace of the heresy was eliminated. Young Tutankhamun, now properly crowned in the traditional manner, was brought to consecrate the restored sanctuary. The boy pharaoh, dwarfed by the massive columns, recited the ancient prayers he had been taught. Great Amun-Ra, King of the gods, forgive Egypt's transgression. We return to your embrace, seeking your protection and blessing. The crowd of priests and nobles cheered, but General Horemheb noticed the boy's voice lacked conviction. Later, in private, he confronted the young pharaoh. You speak the words, but do you believe them? Tutankhamun looked up at the imposing general with surprising maturity. I believe in Egypt's survival. If that requires me to praise Amun today, and perhaps another god tomorrow, so be it. Horemheb studied him carefully. You learned pragmatism young. Good. You'll need it. The priests think they've won, but they've only restored the old problems. The corruption, the power struggles, they'll all return. Then perhaps, the boy said quietly, my brother-in-law was not entirely wrong. He just moved too fast, too absolutely. Horemheb's eyes narrowed dangerously. Never speak such thoughts aloud again. The heretic's ideas died with him. Remember that, if you wish to avoid his fate. In a remote villa in the Nile Delta, Nefertiti lived under an assumed name, her once glorious beauty hidden beneath the simple clothes of a minor noble's widow. Only 2 loyal servants who had followed her from Akhetaten knew her true identity. She spent her days teaching local children to read and write, finding purpose in small acts of education. One evening, a traveling merchant arrived with news from Thebes. Spias in car. They say the boy Pharaoh has restored all the old temples, he reported to the villa's inhabitants. Egypt prospers again under Amun's blessing. Spitting. The heretic Pharaoh's name is being erased from every monument. Nefertiti listened silently, her face revealing nothing. Later, alone in her chamber, she pulled out a hidden papyrus, the only copy of Akhenaten's great hymn to the Aten that survived. She read it by candlelight, his words bringing tears to her eyes. When you rise, they live. When you set, they die. You yourself are lifetime. One lives by you. A young girl she tutored, Meritamen, found her crying. Innocently, why do you weep, lady? Nefertiti wiped her tears. Sadly, I weep for a dream that died, child. For a man who saw truth but couldn't make others see it. Curious, tell me about this dream, the girl asked innocently. Nefertiti looked at her, then began to speak, not of Akhenaten the pharaoh, but of a vision of divine light accessible to all, of truth without intermediaries. She was planting seeds, just as her husband had predicted. The revolution had failed, but ideas, once released, could never be entirely destroyed. The workshop had been sealed for 2 years when tomb robbers broke in, hoping to find abandoned gold. Instead, they discovered Thutmose's abandoned studio, filled with plaster casts and half-finished sculptures. Among them, covered in dust and fallen cloth, was the painted limestone bust of Nefertiti. The lead robber, Peneb, lifted it carefully. Look at this craftsmanship. This was the heretic's queen. His partner, Amenhotep, spat. "Cursed work. We should destroy it." "Destroy art like this? Are you mad? Someone will pay well for this, curse or no curse." But as they prepared to leave with their prize, temple guards burst in. The robbers were captured, and the bust was brought before the high priest. Amenhotep studied it with mixed emotions. The beauty was undeniable, but it represented everything they were trying to erase. "Destroy it," he ordered. But the guard captain, Mena, hesitated. "Holy One, perhaps we should preserve it as a warning, to show future generations the face of heresy." Amenhotep considered, then shook his head. "No, beauty like this makes heresy attractive. Bury it deep in the desert where no one will find it. Let the sand claim what the heretic tried to build." As the bust was carried away to be buried, no one could have imagined that one day, thousands of years later, it would be discovered again, becoming one of the most famous faces of ancient Egypt, ensuring that Nefertiti, and by extension Akhenaten's revolution, would never be entirely forgotten. 5 years had passed since Akhenaten's death, and Tutankhamun, now 13, began to assert his own authority. In the royal chambers at Thebes, he met secretly with his childhood friend and scribe Amenhotep, who had served him since Akhetaten. "Tell me truthfully," the young pharaoh said, "what do the people really think of the restoration?" Amenhotep chose his words carefully. "Majesty, the priests are satisfied, the army is strong again, trade flows, but some remember that under the Aten they prayed freely, without expensive offerings. They remember that your brother-in-law, for all his madness, walked among them, spoke to them directly." Tutankhamun moved to a hidden compartment in his chamber, pulling out a small solar disk. Not an R10 symbol, but something similar. "I dream of him sometimes. Akhenaten. He tells me the truth isn't dead, just sleeping, concerned." "Majesty, such thoughts are dangerous. General Horemheb watches you closely." The young pharaoh smiled sadly. "I know. I play my part, restore the old ways. But I've made small changes, reducing temple taxes, allowing common people more access to outer temple courts. Not revolution, but evolution." A knock at the door interrupted them. Vizier I entered. "Majesty, the high priest requests your presence for the evening rituals." Tutankhamun hid the disc and nodded. Resigned, of course. The gods must be served. But as he left, Amenhotep noticed the pharaoh's fingers traced a small circle on his chest, the sign of the sun disk, invisible to all but those who knew to look. The anniversary of Akhenaten's death passed unmarked officially. But in hidden corners of Egypt, small groups gathered. In a workers' quarter of Thebes, a group of artisans who had worked in Akhetaten met in secret. They shared bread and beer, speaking of their time in the City of Light. Old Thutmose, the sculptor, now worked on traditional pieces but kept his revolutionary techniques. "I still use the proportions he taught us," he admitted. "The way he showed us to capture movement, emotion. I hide it in traditional scenes, but it's there." A younger artist, Kayemwaset, nodded. "Yesterday, a noble woman commissioned a portrait. She asked for that living quality the heretics artists had. She didn't know I was one of those artists." They laughed quietly, but their mirth was interrupted by a soft knock, the signal for danger. Temple guards were searching the quarter. The group quickly dispersed, but not before Thutmose whispered, "Next month, same time. We must remember, even if Egypt must forget." In her Delta exile, Nefertiti also marked the day, teaching her small group of students about the sun's journey across the sky. She never mentioned the Aten directly, but her lessons carried its essence. The sun as a source of all life, equally blessing all beneath it. One student asked, curious, "Teacher, why do you love the sun so much?" She smiled, sadly, because once someone showed me that light drives away all darkness if we're brave enough to look directly at it. General Horemheb stood in the war room of Memphis Fortress, studying reports that troubled him deeply. Despite the restoration of traditional worship, Egypt's power continued to decline. The damage from Akhenaten's neglect of foreign policy proved harder to repair than temples. His aide, Parameses, entered with fresh intelligence.
General, the Hittites have taken another 3 cities in Canaan. Our vassals no longer believe Egypt will protect them.
Horemheb slammed his fist on the table.
14 years of that madman's pacifism, and we're still paying the price. He preached peace while our enemies armed themselves.
What of Pharaoh Tutankhamun? Will he authorize a campaign? Horemheb's expression darkened.
The boy plays at being Pharaoh, making pretty speeches about Amun while secretly harboring sympathies for his predecessor's ideas. Did you know he's reduced military funding to increase grain distribution to the poor? Another of Akhenaten's foolish notions.
Perhaps the young pharaoh needs guidance, Parameses suggested carefully, or replacement. Horemheb said quietly, the boy is often ill. His advisors whisper of a weak constitution inherited from his brother-in-law's tainted bloodline. If something were to happen to him, he let the sentence hang in the air, then continued studying his maps. Double our border fortifications. If Egypt is to survive, it needs a strong hand, not a child playing with dangerous ideas. Neither man noticed the shadow outside the door, Eyes' spy, who quickly departed to report this troubling conversation to his master. In the Valley of the Kings, master tomb builder Amenhotep, a different one from the priest, supervised the secret construction of Tutankhamun's tomb. The young pharaoh, despite his youth, had insisted on specific designs that raised eyebrows among the traditional craftsmen. Here, Tutankhamun pointed to the wall plans. I want this scene, the pharaoh greeting the gods. Traditional, Majesty, very appropriate. But here, the pharaoh continued, his finger tracing a specific section. Make the sun disk prominent. Not the Aten, of course, but Amun-Ra in his solar form. Make his rays end in hands that bless. The tomb builder hesitated. Majesty, that sounds very similar to... Annoyed. To nothing. Tutankhamun interrupted firmly. Simply show the sun god's blessing. Surely that's acceptable. Later, as work progressed, the artists noticed other subtle requests. Traditional scenes, but with unusual emphasis on light, on human emotion, on the tenderness between figures. The revolutionary art style of Akhetaten, hidden within conventional religious imagery. One artist whispered to another. He remembers more than he admits. Quiet, his companion warned. The boy pharaoh walks a dangerous line. Don't be the one who pushes him over it. But Tutankhamun, inspecting their work, smiled slightly. He was creating a monument that would preserve both traditions, the old gods visible to all, but the revolutionary spirit hidden in plain sight for those who knew how to look. Vizier I sat in his private study, weighing his options as carefully as a merchant weighs gold. At 70 years old, he had survived Akhenaten's revolution, managed the transition, and now guided young Tutankhamun. But the boy was becoming unpredictable, and Horemheb grew dangerously ambitious. His scribe entered with sealed letters. My lord, correspondence from the Delta region, and this came by secret messenger. The second papyrus bore no seal, but I recognized the handwriting, Nefertiti. After dismissing the scribe, he read her plea. Uncle, for we are family still, I beg you, protect the boy. He is all that remains of my husband's bloodline, and though he must deny it, he carries something of that vision forward. Horemheb plans his death. My sources confirm this. Act, or Egypt will fall under military dictatorship. I burned the letter immediately, but its message lingered. That evening he met privately with Tutankhamun. Majesty, you must take a military campaign. Show strength, or Horemheb will question your fitness to rule. The young pharaoh looked exhausted. I am not a warrior, You know this. Then pretend. Take a ceremonial role. Let Horemheb lead, but be seen as commanding. And Majesty, be very careful what you eat and drink. Your life depends on appearing strong while being cautious. Tutankhamun studied his vizier's face, thoughtful. You know something. I know that Egypt stands at a crossroads, and you, young pharaoh, must survive to choose the path. The hunting expedition in the eastern desert was meant to demonstrate Tutankhamun's vitality, but it would become his doom. The young pharaoh rode his chariot skillfully, his bow drawn as he pursued a lion that had been terrorizing local villages. Horemheb rode alongside, ostensibly protecting his king. As they separated from the main party, chasing the lion into a rocky canyon, Tutankhamun's chariot wheel suddenly shattered. The axle had been weakened. The pharaoh was thrown violently, his body striking the rocks with sickening force. Horemheb dismounted quickly, kneeling beside the broken king. Tutankhamun, blood flowing from his head, looked up at the general with knowing eyes. You, he whispered. Or was it I? Does it matter? Save your strength, Majesty. Help is coming. But Horemheb made no move to call for aid. Tutankhamun coughed blood. I tried to find middle ground between the old and new. Perhaps that was my failure. His hand clutched at something beneath his robes, a small solar disk he always carried. Tell me, General, when you erase my name too, will you remember that we were once something greater? Horemheb took the disk from the dying king's hand. You are weak, like your predecessor. Egypt needs strength. With his last breath, Tutankhamun smiled sadly. Strength without vision is just violence. The general stood as the hunting party arrived, playing the grieving protector. The boy king was dead at 19, and with him died the last direct link to Akhenaten's revolution. The mummification chamber of the palace reeked of natron and myrrh as the priests prepared Tutankhamun's body for eternity. The process was rushed. Horemheb wanted the boy buried quickly before questions could be asked about the suspicious nature of his injuries. The chief embalmer, Amenhotep, noticed the unusual damage, multiple fractures, crushing wounds. This was no simple chariot accident, he murmured to his assistant. Silence, the assistant warned. The general has ears everywhere. As they worked, they found the hidden pocket where Tutankhamun had kept his small solar disk. The assistant moved to report it, but Amenhotep stopped him. Let him keep this small rebellion. The boy deserves that much. Meanwhile, A moved quickly to secure his position. As the highest-ranking advisor and great-uncle to the dead king, he claimed the right to perform the opening of the mouth ceremony, effectively declaring himself pharaoh. Horemheb was furious, but could not openly contest it without revealing his ambitions. In the treasury, scribes worked through the night preparing burial goods. The tomb meant for a long reign had to be filled hastily. Many items were repurposed from other burials, including pieces that bore traces of the Aten's imagery, quickly painted over but not entirely hidden. One scribe noticed something strange. Several items bore the name Tutankhaten before being changed to Tutankhamun. Even in death, he whispered, the boy couldn't fully escape his past. The funeral procession wound through the Valley of the Kings like a golden serpent, but the ceremony felt hollow. The crowds were smaller than expected. Many Egyptians sensed something wrong about their young pharaoh's sudden death. I, wearing the blue crown of kingship, performed the opening of the mouth ceremony on Tutankhamun's mummy with hands that trembled slightly. Whether from age or guilt, none could say. Horemheb stood among the nobles, his face a mask of mourning that didn't reach his eyes. He watched I with barely concealed contempt. The old vizier had outmaneuvered him, but I was 75 years old. Horemheb could wait a little longer. As the mummy was placed in its golden coffins, a young priest named Amenhotep noticed something curious. The innermost coffin bore different artistic styling, more naturalistic, more emotional, clearly the work of Akhetaten artists. Even in death, the revolution's influence couldn't be entirely erased. Nefertiti, in her distant exile, received news of the burial. She stood at her window, looking toward the south, where her husband, and now the last of his line, lay entombed. "They're all gone now." Sad, she whispered to her servant. "The dreamers, the revolutionaries, only the shadows remain." That night, grave robbers attempted to enter the tomb but were caught. Under torture, they revealed they had been hired to retrieve certain items that shouldn't be buried with the boy. The items were never specified, but many suspected they were the last traces of Aten worship that had been buried with Tutankhamun. King A's reign was brief and troubled. At 75, he knew his time was limited, but he worked desperately to preserve some balance between the military and religious factions. In his throne room, he met with both Horemheb and the new high priest of Amun, trying to maintain peace. Determined, Egypt must heal, I insisted, his aged voice still carrying authority. Emphatic. No more revolutions, no more counter-revolutions. Stability must be our goal. Horemheb smiled coldly. Stability requires strength, Majesty. The borders crumble while we debate theology. The high priest countered. Stability requires divine favor. The temples must be fully restored, their treasuries replenished. I saw the trap. Both men were positioning themselves for his succession. That night, alone in his chambers, he pulled out a hidden document, Tutankhamun's secret will, naming his successor. The young pharaoh had chosen neither general nor priest, but a minor noble named Akhenaten, known for his moderate views. I burned the document. "Forgive me, boy," he whispered. But Egypt cannot survive another disputed succession. Better to let the strongest take power than to invite civil war. He began preparing his own tomb, incorporating strange elements, traditional scenes mixed with subtle solar imagery, as if trying to reconcile in death what couldn't be reconciled in life. His artists, many veterans of Akhetaten, understood his intention. One carved an inscription that would survive millennia. He who served many masters, but served Egypt above all. 4 years into I's reign, death finally claimed the old king. He died in his sleep, peacefully, though some whispered poison. Within hours, Horemheb mobilized his troops, marching on Thebes before the priests could react. The succession was settled, not by divine decree, but by military might. In the coronation ceremony, Horemheb broke with tradition. Instead of claiming divine birth or royal bloodline, he declared himself chosen by the army and people of Egypt. "I am not born to the throne," he announced. "I have earned it through service to Egypt. The age of weak kings and mad visionaries ends today." His first decree was comprehensive. Every trace of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and I would be erased from history. Their names would be chiseled from monuments, their reigns stricken from king lists. Officially, Horemheb's reign would be dated from the death of Amenhotep III, as if the Amarna period never existed. Master sculptor Thutmose, now elderly, was commanded to destroy all remaining artwork from Akhetaten. He stood before a hidden cache of sculptures, including another bust of Nefertiti, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive me, Mike." The systematic erasure of the Amarna period began with frightening efficiency. Teams of workers spread across Egypt, armed with chisels and hammers, destroying every cartouche, every image, every mention of the heretic pharaohs. In Karnak, where it all began, the destruction was most thorough. A young scribe named Waset was assigned to record which inscriptions were removed, ensuring nothing was missed. As he worked, he couldn't help but read some of the texts before they were destroyed. One inscription, hidden behind a statue, was part of Akhenaten's hymn to the Aten. Waset read it quickly before calling the workers. "You appear beautifully on the horizon of heaven, O living Aten, the beginning of life." The words stirred something in him, but he pushed the feeling aside and marked the text for destruction. In the abandoned city of Akhetaten, now called the Place of the Rebel, demolition crews worked to dismantle the temples. But the city was so vast, the sun so punishing, that much was simply left to the desert. The foreman, Amenhotep, made a practical decision. Take what's valuable, the gold, the precious stones, leave the rest for the sand. Nature will erase what we cannot. Unknown to him, this decision would preserve thousands of carved blocks, buried by sand, waiting to tell their story to future archaeologists. As night fell, some workers secretly pocketed small items, amulets, pottery shards with Aten imagery, not from belief, but from a sense that something historic was being destroyed.
In her Delta exile, Nefertiti received word that the erasure had begun. Her loyal servants suggested fleeing Egypt entirely, but the former queen, now in her 50s, refused. "Firmly, I will die in Egypt," she said. "They can erase my name from stone, but not from memory." She had spent years teaching children, never revealing her identity, but passing on modified versions of Akhenaten's ideas, the importance of direct observation of nature, the unity underlying all creation, the danger of intermediaries who claim exclusive access to truth. One of her students, now grown, visited her. "Thoughtful teacher, they say the heretic Pharaoh was mad, that his queen was a witch who corrupted Egypt." Nefertiti sadly smiled. "What do you think?" "I think," the young man said carefully, "that anyone who threatens established power is called mad. But you taught us to think for ourselves, to observe directly. That doesn't seem mad to me." That night, Horemheb's soldiers arrived. Someone had finally identified her. The captain, a man named Amenhotep, entered her simple room. "Quietly, you are commanded to disappear," he said. "Officially, you died years ago. Unofficially, you have this night to vanish forever." She looked at him steadily. "And if I refuse?" "Then you force me to make it official." He paused, then added quietly, "My mother lived in Akhetaten. She spoke of a queen who walked among the people, who treated servants as humans. Disappear, lady. Give me that gift." Nefertiti's disappearance became legend. Some said she fled to Nubia, others that she sailed to the mysterious lands beyond the Great Green Sea. But the truth was simpler and sadder. She walked into the eastern desert at dawn. Toward the sunrise, she and Akhenaten had worshipped, carrying only water and the hidden papyrus of her husband's hymn. A hermit living in the desert caves found her body days later, peaceful, facing the rising sun. Not knowing who she was, he buried her in the sand with simple dignity, placing stones in a pattern that unknowingly recreated the Aten's disk. The hermit kept the papyrus, unable to read but sensing its importance. Meanwhile, in Thebes, Horemheb received confirmation of her disappearance. "The last of them is gone," his aide reported. "The heresy is dead." But that very night, reports came of strange incidents. In Memphis, workers renovating a temple found a hidden chamber filled with Aten imagery. In the Delta, farmers reported finding small solar discs buried in their fields, placed there as blessings years ago. Most disturbing to Horemheb, his own scribe had been caught with a copy of Akhenaten's hymn. Under interrogation, the scribe revealed that copies had been circulating secretly for years, hidden in other texts, memorized by those who found truth in the words. "Grimly, ideas," Horemheb said grimly, "are harder to kill than people." He ordered increased surveillance, but privately wondered if the heretic's last prophecy was true, that the seed was planted,
waiting for the right time to grow. 20 years had passed since Akhenaten's death. Horemheb, now old himself, stood in the rebuilt Karnak temple, where no trace of the Aten remained. Yet he felt no triumph, only exhaustion. Egypt was stable but stagnant, powerful but purposeless. His chosen successor, Ramesses I, would soon take the throne and found a new dynasty. In the House of Life, where scribes were trained, an elderly teacher named Amenhotep, who had once been young Tutankhamun's friend, taught carefully edited history. But occasionally, when alone with trusted students, he would speak of a time when art lived, when God was light itself, when a pharaoh dared to dream of truth. One student asked, "Master, if the Aten religion was so wrong, why do we still use the artistic techniques from that time? Why do our prayers to Amun-Ra sound so similar to the forbidden hymns?" Amenhotep smiled carefully. "Truth, young one, is like the Nile. You can dam it, redirect it, but you cannot stop its flow. The heretic pharaoh was wrong in his methods, perhaps, but some of his ideas..." He paused, choosing his words. "Some ideas are like seeds in the desert. They wait, sometimes for centuries, for the right conditions to grow." That night, the old scribe pulled out a hidden text, not Akhenaten's hymn, but something new, synthesizing the old and new, preparing for a future that might be ready for gradual change rather than revolution. He was not alone. Across Egypt, in hidden groups, similar work continued. The workshop had been sealed for 30 years when the earthquake cracked its walls. Local villagers exploring the damage discovered Thutmose's hidden cache of Amarna art. Among the pieces was a statue of Akhenaten and Nefertiti holding hands, their daughters playing at their feet, a scene of family intimacy that still had power to move. The village elder, Kamwaset, remembered his grandfather's stories. "These are from the forbidden time," he said. "We should report this to the authorities." But a younger man, Amenemhab, argued differently. "Look at the beauty, the life in these pieces. Why should art be destroyed because of politics?" The village debated through the night. Finally, they reached a compromise. The pieces clearly showing Aten worship would be reburied. But the portraits, the artistic studies, the revolutionary techniques captured in stone, these they would secretly preserve. They created a hidden shrine, not to worship the heretic pharaoh, but to honor the artists who had dared to see the world differently. Each year, on the anniversary of the discovery, villagers would gather to look at the art, to remember that once Egypt had been different. Children grew up knowing that history was more complex than the official version, that truth could be dangerous, that beauty transcended politics. The cache became a seed of cultural memory, preserved not by priests or nobles, but by common people who recognized truth when they saw it, even if they couldn't fully understand it. In the great library of Memphis, an aged scholar named Manetho worked on a comprehensive history of Egypt's dynasties. Officially, he was to skip from Amenhotep III directly to Horemheb, as if the Amarna period never existed. But Manetho had spent years collecting fragments, testimonies, and hidden documents. Late at night, he wrote a secret parallel history. In it, he documented Akhenaten not as a heretic, but as a revolutionary philosopher, Nefertiti not as a corrupting influence, but as a partner in transformation, Tutankhamun not as a weak boy, but as someone caught between two worlds. History, he wrote, is written by victors, but truth has a way of surviving in the margins, in the gaps, in the silence between official words. His student, finding him working on the forbidden text, was horrified, appalled. "Master, this is treason." Manetho smiled. "No, thoughtful, this is history. Someday, when Egypt is ready, when the world is ready, this truth will emerge. We are not writing for today, but for tomorrow." He sealed the secret history in a hidden compartment, along with copies of Akhenaten's hymns, artistic studies from Amarna, and testimonies from those who lived through the revolution. "Let future generations judge," he said. Thoughtful, we preserve not because we agree or disagree, but because erasure of history is erasure of humanity's capacity to change, to dream, to fail and try again. The official history would survive in temple walls, but the true history would survive in hidden places, waiting. 50 years after Akhenaten's death, Egypt flourished under Ramesses II, the great builder. As workers constructed the massive Abu Simbel temples, they discovered something unusual: foundation blocks from Akhetaten, transported here to be reused. The hieroglyphs had been chiseled away, but the revolutionary artistic style remained. The chief architect, Amenhotep, studied the blocks with professional interest, thoughtful. "Look at these proportions, these techniques. We use them still, though we dare not speak their origin." His assistant asked quietly, "Do you think the heretic Pharaoh knew his city would become foundation stones for traditional temples?" Amenhotep considered. Perhaps that's the ultimate irony, or wisdom. His revolution failed, but pieces of it literally support what came after. In distant Nubia, where Egyptian influence was weaker, something remarkable happened. Local chiefs, having heard stories of the Aten religion from elderly refugees, incorporated solar worship into their own beliefs. Not Akhenaten's pure monotheism, but something syncretic, adaptive. A Nubian priest explained to an Egyptian merchant, relaxed, "Your heretic Pharaoh was wrong to deny all gods but one. But he was right that divine light shines on all people equally. We take his truth and blend it with our truth." Surprised, the merchant, shocked, warned that such beliefs were dangerous. The priest smiled, happy. "Only in Egypt where you fear change. Here, we understand that rivers must flow, winds must blow, and ideas must grow." In the twilight of the new kingdom, as Egypt's power waned and foreign influences grew, a group of Greek scholars visited Thebes. Among them was a young philosopher who would later be known as Herodotus. The Egyptian priest who guided them, Amenhotep, was secretly a keeper of hidden knowledge. When the Greeks asked about Egyptian religion, the priest gave the official version. But later, in private, he told them another story. There was once a pharaoh who declared there was only one God, that this God was the creative force behind all existence, that priests were unnecessary intermediaries. The Greeks were fascinated. This sounds like philosophy, not religion. Perhaps, the priest said carefully, that was his tragedy, being a philosopher in an age that demanded priests. But his ideas did not die. They transformed, went underground, emerged in different forms. He showed them a hidden text, not Akhenaten's original hymn, but an evolved version that had incorporated centuries of secret thought. "Listen," he read, "the divine is one, appearing as many. The light that creates also illuminates truth. No priest owns God. No temple contains the infinite." The young Greek scribe copied every word. These ideas would travel west, mixing with Greek philosophy, influencing thoughts about divine unity, about direct spiritual experience, about the danger of religious hierarchies. Akhenaten's revolution had failed in Egypt, but its seeds would flower in unexpected places, in unexpected ways. 1,000 years had passed. Egypt was now a province of Rome, its ancient religion fading before new faiths. In a monastery in the desert, Christian monks discovered a cache of ancient papyri while expanding their library. Among them was a complete copy of Akhenaten's great hymn to the Aten. Brother Marcus, who could read hieroglyphics, translated it with growing amazement, excited. "Listen to this," he told his fellow monks, thoughtful. "You are the one God, beside whom there is no other. You created the earth according to your heart, while you were alone." Brother Paul frowned, confused. This sounds like our Psalms. How can a pagan text contain such truth? The abbot, wiser, understood, calmly. Truth is eternal, brothers. It appears in many forms, many voices. This Pharaoh, whoever he was, glimpsed the divine unity we now worship. They preserved the text not as pagan heresy, but as evidence that God had always revealed himself to those who truly sought. The hymn's imagery, light creating life, divine love for all creation, the rejection of intermediaries, resonated with their own beliefs. Unknown to them, similar discoveries were happening across the Mediterranean world. Akhenaten's ideas, preserved in fragments and evolved through centuries of secret transmission, were influencing the very religions that had replaced the gods he had fought. The revolution that had failed in ancient Egypt was succeeding, transformed beyond recognition in the birth of monotheistic thought that would reshape the world. In the modern archaeological camp at Tel El Amarna, Dr. Sarah Mitchell carefully brushed sand from a carved relief. After a century of excavations, they were still finding traces of Akhetaten. This particular relief showed Akhenaten lifting his daughter to kiss her, a scene of paternal tenderness unique in ancient art. Her Egyptian colleague, Dr. Ahmed Hassan, worked nearby on recently discovered tablets. Excited, "Sarah, look at this. It's a letter from a common worker, thanking the pharaoh for allowing him to pray directly to God without paying the priests." Sarah smiled, thoughtful. Every piece we find makes the picture more complex. He wasn't just a heretic or a madman. He was a revolutionary who tried to democratize religion. That evening, as the sun set over the ruins of Akhetaten, the team gathered to discuss their findings. The city that was meant to be erased forever was slowly revealing its secrets. Dr. Hassan raised his water bottle in a toast. Raising voice, "To Akhenaten, who failed magnificently. To Nefertiti, whose beauty outlasted those who would destroy it. Proudly, to all the dreamers who dare to imagine the world differently." As they watched the sun disk sink toward the horizon, painting the ancient stones gold, they understood something profound. The revolution hadn't failed, it had transformed. Every monotheistic religion, every artistic innovation, every challenge to religious authority carried echoes of that ancient experiment in truth. Akhenaten had wanted to change the world in a generation. Instead, his ideas took millennia to flower, appearing in forms he never could have imagined. The sun rose over the Nile as it had for millions of years, its rays touching the waters that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless dynasties. In Cairo Museum, the bust of Nefertiti drew crowds who marveled at her beauty, unaware they were looking at the face of revolution. In homes around the world, people read Akhenaten's hymn, finding in its words an ancient expression of truths they held dear. The heretic Pharaoh had been erased from king lists, his city abandoned to the desert, his family destroyed. But his core message, that divine truth needs no intermediary, that all people deserve direct access to the sacred, that power structures built on exclusive religious knowledge are ultimately false, had proven impossible to kill. In the ruins of Akhetaten, now a tourist site, a young Egyptian guide named Amenhotep, the name had never truly disappeared, explained to visitors. Thoughtful, Akhenaten failed because he tried to impose truth by decree. But truth cannot be imposed, it must be discovered personally by each seeker. As the tour group moved on, the guide remained, looking at the carved image of the Aten, its rays ending in hands that blessed all equally. He whispered words that had been whispered for 3,000 years, in hidden gatherings, in secret texts, in the hearts of those who dared to dream. The light shines on all. The truth belongs to none and to everyone. The revolution continues. The sun disk completed another journey across the sky, as it had during Akhenaten's time, as it would long after all human revolutions had passed into memory and myth. But somewhere, in someone's heart, the seeds of change were always waiting for their moment to grow toward the light. As our journey through the sands of time draws to its close, we find ourselves contemplating the eternal dance between revolution and tradition, between the dreamer's vision and humanity's resistance to change. The story of Akhenaten reminds us that truth, like the desert sand, cannot be permanently shaped by human hands. It flows, transforms, and endures beyond any single lifetime or kingdom. In the quiet moments before sleep claims you, consider how the light of the Akhetaten still touches us, not through temples or priests, but in every sunrise that promises new beginnings, in every act of questioning established power, in every soul that dares to seek truth directly, without intermediaries. The ancient Egyptians believed that to speak someone's name was to make them live again. Tonight, in speaking of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and young Tutankhamun, we have breathed life into their memory, allowing their triumphs and failures to whisper wisdom across the centuries. The ruins of Akhetaten lie silent now beneath the stars, but the dreams born there continue their patient journey through human consciousness. Perhaps that is the greatest truth the heretic Pharaoh discovered, that revolutions of the spirit cannot be measured in years or dynasties, but in the slow transformation of human understanding, one heart, one mind, one generation at a time. Thoughtful, as you drift toward dreams, remember that you too carry seeds of change, waiting for their season to bloom. The light that blessed ancient Egypt blesses you still, equally, freely, asking only that you have the courage to look directly at truth, whatever form it takes in your own life.